Tom Walsh. Check your message. Check a direct message from me. This is Barbara.
Oh, okay. In the chat? I don't see a message in the chat.
Let me make sure I've sent it. We'll see.
Okay.
How about now I've sent it?
Oh, yes. Let me send March. Let me double check on my phone here.
Oh, I know you know the day. You are shameful. You are shameful. Sorry.
I know I should know this. It's terrible. I'm terrible at remembering days. I have an app here on my phone that helps me.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, March 27th.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, you bet. Well, thanks for asking.
I got it.
Oh, perfect.
Buy her pills.
Test. Welcome to the January 24th meeting of the Rotary Club of Ames. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jim Hatton told me about Bill LaGrange, died Saturday, January 22nd at the Israel Hospice House. His body will be cremated and the services will be held at a later date. So is there anyone else that we should be keeping in our thoughts? Let's just take a moment for Bill and his friends and family. Thank you. You can be seated. Steve Johnson is here as a visiting Rotarian, and Jim Patton brought his wife, Diane. Thank you for coming. Yes, and Louis is going to sing remotely. So Louis, take it away.
Okay, I'm happy to do it today for all of you that are there. Welcome to you from Ames Rotary, Nevada, London, or Gay Paris, from far off lands or the USA. We're glad that you are here today. Come back again whenever you're near. Join us and then we'll make it clear. Around the world you will always be welcome at Rotary.
Happy birthday to Louis. Happy birthday, Louis.
Hello.
Thank you. It was yesterday.
Great. At this time, I will invite up Kent to introduce our speaker.
Kent had a big fat strawberry in his mouth, and so I apologize, I wasn't quite ready. Wonderful to see everybody here today on a nice warm Monday in Iowa. Thank you all for coming out and those that are joining us online. I once again have the opportunity to present somebody very special that will share anything and everything you've ever wanted to know about the brain. No test. I have with us today Seldon Spencer, Dr. Seldon Spencer. He's been in general neurology practice with McFarland for 32 years. And prior to that, he dabbled in research at Washington University in St. Louis and at the University of Iowa before that. He and his family have lived in Huxley for 30 years. His kids are grown and they're on their way. His wife is a retiring pediatric ophthalmologist. And I think, did you say this coming year or next year for that? In 23. He does dabble in music here and there and just found out he sings in the choir at church. So that's always a fun thing to share. Doctor, the stage is yours.
Well, good afternoon. I am going to take off my mask because it's sometimes easier to understand somebody when they have their mask off. And I'm far enough away that I won't spread too much to you. Let me assure you, I don't have COVID. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have gone there. But no, I really appreciate the honor of being here and speaking with the Rotary. And this came from a very common interaction that I've had with some of you here today, which is, hey, I'm kind of slipping, you know, my memory isn't quite as good as it can be. And truthfully, my practice deals with dementia, and dementia is a horrible thing. Dementia is something where you are no longer able to function and manage your own affairs. But that's not what the majority of people deal with. Most people deal with, hey, I'm just not as quick as I used to be. I forget somebody's name, that type of issue. So this talk is directed toward what is normal aging and just talking about aging in general. And I think it was Stalin or somebody like that said that when you're talking to people, say what you want to say right away, and then tell them what you want to know right away, and then repeat it at the end. So I'm going to tell you what you need to know right at the beginning, and then we'll come back to it at the end. In between, there's going to be a lot of chatter that's science. And I trust the people will show me a sign or something like that. I should speed up or get off the table or whatever. So here we go. Yeah, this is a talk I gave at Mary Greeley, but this is the basics. And I use a mnemonics down at the bottom. I think Kent used SWAMs, but you can use MAMs, whatever. But the basic idea is aerobic activity improves brain health. Sleep is critical for clearance of debris. Mediterranean diet is beneficial. Positive social interaction is healthy for the brain. Weightlifting and resistance efforts are beneficial. Now, you've probably all heard all of those things before, but I'm going to dig in a little bit to try and demonstrate why that is the case, and also to talk a little bit about aging in general. All right, and that's your mnemonic, WAMSS, or maybe SWAMS. Anyway, you can play around with that if you like. So the fact is, as we get older, you lose both gray matter and white matter, although it's variable. And it's mainly the frontal lobes and temporal lobes. The parietal lobes here and your occipital lobes do not deteriorate. And I'm talking mainly about the cerebrum, the big part of the brain up here. And there is reorganization that goes on in all of us, and that's how we compensate. And classically, the three things we lose as we get older, all of us, whether or not you go on to dementia or not, is you lose processing speed, episodic memory, and executive control. And I'll get into that a little bit more in detail. It can be moderated, and that's the point of the talk today. So there are compensatory elements that we'll talk about as well. So now I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. Now remember, you've heard the main message: diet, sleep, aerobic exercise, weightlifting. These are all very important to keep your brain compensating as well as it can as you decline. So how much of this is genetic and DNA related? How much of it is just wear and tear? The fact of having a nice meal is getting your cells of your brain and your body nutrients, but processing those nutrients takes it out on the cells and wears down the cells. And I'll talk about that a little bit. What hurts the cells and neurons and the energy consumption that goes along with it. All right, so how much of it is genetic? First of all, there's a condition maybe all of you know about called progeria, which is premature aging, and it has a genetic basis. It's not very common. A child born with progeria will die by the age 20 and will proceed to age, just like somebody who lives to age 80 or 90. And it's related to that one chromosomal defect. And there's similar genetic problems that impair or modify longevity and aging that have been found in animals and to some degree in humans. Every cell in our body has a limitation in how many reproductions it can go through, how many cell divisions it can go through, and I'll talk about that. And that's controlled by the little shoelace at the end. And then the thing that I think is new, that for me is kind of new and maybe is new to you, is cells don't always die. You know, sometimes cells turn into cancerous demons or they become senescent cells. And that was kind of a new concept to me. And the world of neurology is interested in how to modify senescent cells. And I'll get into that in a moment. Okay, so this is progeria. This is an unfortunate gentleman that's already passed away. That's his mother. And it's just a fact that some people will age more quickly and disastrously than others. And And I think spending time trying to figure out what your genetic aging element is probably not worth it. None of you have progeria. You wouldn't be here if you did. So what about telomeres? So this is the old shoelace thing at the very end. That DNA is going to splice, and every time it's spliced, you can have more cells and more cells. But as that shoelace begins to deteriorate, the prospect of the cells dividing goes away. And telomerase is the enzyme that modifies that tail end of the shoelace. As the telomeres shorten, eventually the cell division stops. Now, there's some immortality that we want to talk about. I think it's just for curiosity's sake. Some people think certain animals like lobsters are immortal, and there certainly is a lot of variation in stem cell behavior in different animals, but we'll stay with humans and focus on that. And so what about a cell? So a normal cell, normally as it gets to the end and the telomere is no longer able to provide an option for the DNA to splice, there's a program in the DNA that says, okay, you're done, time to die. That's called apoptosis. And the DNA mechanism for cellular death is intact in all of us and usually works. However, sometimes it doesn't. And the cell gets to the tail end, and for some reason or another, it has prospects to develop into a cancerous cell and just keep dividing like crazy. And I'm not talking about the brain necessarily, other parts of the body. But it can also become a senescent cell, and I think this is fascinating. So I like the picture on the right. Let me see if I can get the thing. Okay, so even if you're a baby, you're going to have some senescent cells. But as you get older, you get more and more senescent cells. And again, I bring this up not because this is an insight on your memory impairment, but as an insight about aging and how things go bad. And as your cells get older, they have different things that go wrong. And as I said, they can just set up, shut down and become apoptotic and die, or they can go into the senescent mode, which is, I don't think, a particularly good thing. And as I've said, I've been to talks and I've heard talks about people developing different kinds of cancer therapy that they think would arrest the number of senescent cells. I think it's unclear how valuable and important senescent cells are in our health one way or another. But senescent cells, back up, has secretions called senescent associated sensory phenotype. Anyway, a lot of immunomodulating products that just create an environment for cancer. So enough about that. Other than I just wanted to show one example. If you're talking about lymphocytes, I think this is particularly lymphocytes. Your white cells are what protect you, right? They fight off the COVID, they fight off other things. As you get older, you get lymphocytes that are not only ineffective, but they inhibit the emergence of healthy new ones. They tell the bone marrow, don't produce more. So I think that's more than you wanted to know about senescent cells. Okay, so let's talk, now we're gonna go macro. And this all makes very good sense. We have frontal lobe shrinkage, which again, I don't know why the frontal lobe shrinks in all of us, but that controls our executive function and our ability to stay attentive to activities. With aging, the temporal lobe shrinks, and the temporal lobe is key for memory. Okay, so we're losing tissue. This is a picture of a nice 20-year-old with big brain, and this is maybe an 80-year-old with less brain. This is the CT scan from 1984 and then 2007, and you see all the loss of the tissue out here. Now, so again, frontal lobe is all about executive function. I just want to burden your day with a comment about the default mode network, which is, I think, key to our cognitive function. And we do not have a good way of measuring how healthy but that is very much our ability to stay attentive to things as we go along. So memory is more than episodic memory. And episodic memory is the thing that seems to go down as we get older. And that's what everybody gets frustrated about. Can't remember that name or can't remember that event. But there's tons of other memories like procedural memory that doesn't go away. And that's a little bit of a mystery. So hippocampus, yes. What about processing speed? Remember, I told you 3 things go down: processing speed, memory, episodic memory, and executive function. I do not have an anatomical location for processing speed, but just so you know what it's like, here is a little key that you're supposed to work from, and then the speed with which you can translate that key and interpret that is a measurement of processing speed. My own kind of thought is that it's more a function of how well circulation and glucose utilization goes on as you get older. So it's not specific anatomically. All right, so what about compensatory abilities? So we do have very specific connectivity that goes down, but we de-differentiate as we get older. And this is a very complicated little slide. I apologize, but the basic idea is maybe you have terrific memory for scenes that's very specific. Or maybe you have very specific memory for objects that's very specific, anatomically located. But there's a little sharing between this, and the sharing of these abilities improves as you get older. Right? I'll leave that alone. And now let's talk about our abilities. And this is all still kind of mysterious to me, that the left frontal cortex does not, its shrinkage speaks very much to cognitive reserve. So why this one part of the frontal lobe does not shrink as much as other parts and is highly dependent on your cognitive background is a peculiarity to it. So there are, as I always tell my patients, I say, we know a little bit about why the brain goes bad. We know nothing about how the brain compensates. We know very little about it. And it is a fact. You see people compensating all the time, and we do not know much about it other than this left frontal cortex is very important in that regard. Okay, so how do you compensate? So there's always, now we're going to get back to the beginning. Remember? Diet, sleep, aerobic activity, weights, and social interaction are the fundamental things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the data of support for those ideas. And of course, animal studies are not the same as human studies. So I'll get to it in a minute. Here we go. All right. So eating and aging, what you eat, how much you eat, when you eat. These are all variables, and it's a little bewildering as you're enjoying your lunch, but I think I'm going to talk about it anyway. This was a huge study that went on at the University of Wisconsin and then replicated at the NIH, and they came up with different results. So this has been an area of controversy ever since, which is University of Wisconsin. This is in monkeys, documented if they had less food, they would live longer and do better. Whereas the NIH was not able to reproduce that evidence. So this remains, and I have always been interested in, there's a literature about famines and how people turn out that survive famines. The one most recently was looking back at the Leningrad famine during World War II and women that became pregnant and had children during that famine. And the children do very well. They are very healthy, they live long lives. So the whole concept of how much food you take in is relevant to aging. And there's a guy at UCSD San Diego long ago that just published tons and tons of stuff. And I think this will be simplified in this, where he's looked at all these different type of beasts and animals. And if the dietary restriction affects this one key enzyme called mTOR, which really regulates how much the cell is going to catabolize or do or work, period. So he's a big believer in food restriction, dietary restriction, modifying and improving health. So now should I feel bad about not having lunch? I don't know. Anyway, sorry about that. Anyway, okay, here we go. Now, what to eat and is it too late? Now, so this is the Mediterranean diet, and people don't like hearing this particularly well in Iowa or any place, but the fact is, lots of evidence that if your diet is mainly focused on vegetables, fruit, olive oil, fish, you live longer and you age better. So that type of dietary information is out there, and I picked out something from a European study that just supports that notion. You're going to live longer and healthier with that type of diet. All right, sleep. Oh, this is so important. And it's something, and it's a new word for you here is lymphatic drainage. And this is kind of new in the last 4 or 5 years. So this is the summary right here. During sleep, especially slow wave sleep, this is the EEG, versus alert sleep, you get more drainage of metabolic waste. And this is kind of showing the space between the arteries going into the extracellular matrix and back into the venous system, the lymphatic drainage. If you sleep well, you get more drainage. That's good. All right. Now exercise. Now this is the important thing because again, we always talk about 20 minutes of aerobic activity a day. I just want to throw in the whole idea of weights, and now I'll break up and tell you an animal research project, which I share with my patients too. This guy in Missouri took mice, and half the mice had to wear a big backpack, and the big backpack and that big backpack slowed them down going up the ladder that they had to get their food. So the regular mice could, bolt up the ladder, get their food, run around, have a good day. Whereas the mice with the backpacks, get up there and get their food. After a while, the animals were then allowed to go through the maze. Guess who went through the maze faster? The animals who were carrying the backpack. As the experiment was terminated, the animals that had carried a backpack had more muscle. Big surprise. But they also had bigger brains. They had seen neurogenesis in the hippocampal structure. And it's felt to be partly derived from a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is enhanced as you build muscle. Now, if you look at all the Prevagen ads and all the other ads about things, they whisper about trying to enhance brain-derived neurotrophic factor. But why buy it in bottle when you can get a can of beans and just pump your bicep, 20 times, okay? You can get your own brain-derived neurotrophic factor, all right? And so again, this is just a slide. This is actually runners. And again, you could see new neurons from aerobic activity, but aerobic activity is different than weightlifting, and they're both very valuable. Okay, so how much exercise? Again, you've heard this a billion times, 20 minutes per day. I can't tell you the amount of research that's gone into try and determine how much exercise. I just kind of tell people, if you can get to the point that you do a little huffing and puffing, that's good, all right? Or you can feel your heart rate up a little bit, that's good. And then, as I said before, doing some bicep curls or anything of that sort. Don't try to bench press 300 pounds, just get out there and do a little bit of weightlifting. All right, so, social. I think, anyway, I cited an article here. You can find endless literature, but it's not, you are doing it right now. The fact that you're here And people always ask me, well, should I do more crossword puzzles? No, interact with people. The challenge of looking somebody in the eye, interacting with them, trying to interpret what they're saying or what they're feeling is tremendous exercise for your brain, the social, and of course, it needs to be positive. I think if you're engaged in situations that are very negative and hostile, that's not real good for your brain. Okay, so we're back to the end. Weights, do some weights, build muscle, build brain. Aerobic, do some vigorous walking, say 20 minutes a day. Mediterranean, eat less, smile more, eat right, no fights. Try to make a poem. All right, so sleep, treasure and savor your sleep and naps. Actually, people get all wound up about naps or not naps. Don't worry about it. If you feel like you need to take a nap, enjoy it. I think there's nothing unhealthy about that. Now, unless it screws up your ability to sleep at night. All right, and then social positive, frequent social interactions is to our advantage. And I think that's it. So I don't know, do we have time for questions or anybody want to pipe up? I'll give you my opinion. Go ahead. Yeah, I didn't. I guess I don't have any. Oh, the question was, I didn't talk about water consumption, and actually it's a very good question, and I honestly don't have any hard data to share with you. I suspect that what you're always told, 8 glasses of water a day is a good thing, but I will think about it. I guess that's the best I can do. Yeah. And I should say also, this is kind of almost comedic. So this morning, before coming over here, here's a recently published Alzheimer's and Dementia, the Journal of Alzheimer's Association, I'm sorry. They wanted to know what is the dose of these different SWAMs, WAMs interactions should be. What is the dose? And what they found out in this study that was carried out in Helsinki and Toulouse, France, is 12 to 14 sessions is sufficient to change your cognitive decline. If you have a feeling that you're having, anyway, I don't know whether to believe this study or not, but thought I'd share it. Okay, tell me.
Okay, what do you think about these drugs that are advertised on TV all the time, like Prevagen, and
Yeah.
you should start taking it when you're 55 and you'll have a memory like an elephant and all that, which I've already missed by 30 years. But what about all these drugs?
Well, they'll never receive FDA approval because they're all herbal in nature and they do not require FDA approval. The research that showed that they're beneficial has been done on animals and it's pretty weak, So, it's like a lot of things. There's a certain placebo element to it that if you think this is going to help me, I think it's going to help me. And that's okay. As I said, the one of them, I think it's Neuroviva or something like that, really emphasize brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which I think would be helpful. But as I said, you can do it without taking a pill. I don't know if I'd be open to everybody else's opinion. I think there's never going to be any kind of clinical trial showing, these people took Prevagen with this cognitive function and these people didn't take Prevagen and this cognitive, and one did better than another. We're never going to see that because it's not FDA approved. It's a non-FDA product. So my opinion is, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. But I don't promote it. I don't tell people. We in the medical field have just a few drugs to help people with cognitive decline, and they are directed more at enhancing the amount of acetylcholine in the brain. And the evidence, FDA approved evidence that they're beneficial is pretty weak. It showed that if you took those drugs, you were kept out of a nursing home 6 months longer than not taking it. So that's not a very good metric. The new one, of course, everybody's heard about is the antibody that gets rid of the amyloid protein in the brain. This is in people with Alzheimer's disease that you're pretty confident about. And that's been nothing but a blow up. It's been very controversial. And brings into the question the whole idea of the amyloid hypothesis anyway. I'm not a big proponent of the amyloid hypothesis. I think the problem with Alzheimer's disease, amyloid is a natural product. And I'm always inclined to bring up the fact that when I was in training, a senior person in our department at WashU died. He had been part of a Nobel Prize winning team, and he had an autopsy and his brain was loaded with amyloid. And yet, to anybody's knowledge, the only cognitive difficulty he had was, oh, I can't remember that article I read the other day or something like that. So again, the pharmaceutical, this is an incredible, I've opened up a big can of worms. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of weeds out here, and I just give you my opinion. And again, there's going to be plenty of other opinions coming along. Anything else?
You mentioned that as we age, the hippocampus gets smaller.
Yep.
In terms of memory, and that's partly why we have episodic memory problems.
Yep.
What's the average size of the hippocampus, and how is that measured?
Yeah, good point. I do not know the average size, but there is a lot of interest. And actually, when I refer people over to the University of Iowa, one of the things I'm hoping for is a volumetric measurement of tissue. It seems to make sense. You know, you lose more volume, you lose more tissue, you got more problems, you know. So your question about what is the size and what is the critical mass in that whole regard is, I don't think it's established, but I think people are measuring it all the time. Just like they're trying, at least at academic centers, they're measuring it. Actually, the cost of the software to run the proper volumetric studies, it just kind of precludes it. We don't do it. Same thing here, at least in Ames. I don't do a lot of amyloid studies. I don't look at spinal fluid or blood products that speak to it. I think it's a researchy thing. Yeah, I think we need to stay with SWAMs or WAMs or whatever, because that's practically what makes a difference, I think. Okay.
I have a question. Wanted to see if you could shed some insight. We had a family member have a stroke and it affected her occipital lobe and nothing else. But now she's seeing very specific things that aren't there. So I wondered about your slide earlier about the memories or the objects.
Yeah. That's very relevant, isn't it?
It was very relevant.
Yeah. So it's kind of more a matter of where in the pathway are things screwed up.
Okay.
And I would say that the receipt of information, given the location of our information, is what's problematic. And the brain, like everything, tries to produce information to fill in the holes. That's a whole nother world that we could talk about, but the brain,
Strokes in the brain, right?
well, the brain wants to fill in the holes. You know, if it's not getting information, it's going to make information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sir.
Is there any correlation between the games people like and their longevity? Do chess players live longer than bridge players, or vice versa, or genomic players? You can take that question wherever you like.
Yeah, I apologize. I think it's like the water question. I think there's probably some literature out there that speaks to that, but not that I know of. I think you could ask the same question about musicians, and you could ask, you know, and I personally believe that the more challenges that your brain deals with, the healthier you're going to be. The brain is going to be. So if you utilize your musical abilities, if you utilize your chess skills, that's going to serve you. And, you know, you've all heard that story that, you know, take up a new hobby, you know, try something different. And If you can do so safely, I think that's beneficial, but I can't cite you any literature that speaks to that. That's my bias, I guess.
Is there
Yes.
any difference in handedness, left-handed versus right-handed?
None that I know of. Although, you know, that's always the ambidextrous element would be more relevant in that you're using other parts of the brain that they have been recruited to do things. You know, if it's strictly left or right, I don't think it makes a lot of difference. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about sleep. And so how do you know if you're getting enough sleep? You talked
Right.
about being in REM, but does that mean if you don't remember you had a dream, you're not in REM?
Right,
Yeah.
right. I've been very impressed with all the devices that people come into the office with. You know, they have wristwatches of one sort or another, and I think they're pretty good. I think they're pretty good as far as picking up slow wave versus REM sleep. And man, you're talking an area that I think is incredibly important. Is it just purely a matter of quantity or quality? And one thing that does happen, unfortunately reflecting what we just talked about, is that as you get older, you lose slow wave sleep. Slow wave sleep is how you get the best lymphatic drainage out of your brain. Why is that? I personally think the brain not only shrinks, it gets hard. And so it's flexibility. But getting back to the whole idea of measuring your sleep, I think we are gifted to have intrinsic awareness of our sleep. It's just amazing. You know, I can ask you, you have to sleep 10 hours tonight, and you won't. You'll sleep 8 hours. You know, your body is set to a certain number of hours. I would just plead that you listen to your body, that geez, I feel tired. I know I need to push through to do this project or something like that, but maybe not. Maybe you listen to your body and sleep when you need to sleep. I think sleep is poorly understood.
If I can ask another one, the popular comic Robin Williams supposedly committed suicide because they discovered Lewy bodies in his brain.
Mhm.
And this apparently is worse than most of the other brain diseases.
Yeah.
Why was that so bad that drove him that far to commit suicide? Have you any idea?
Well, yeah, I mean, Lewy body dementia is pretty ugly because it's a mix of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. You know, basically you have in Alzheimer's disease involvement of the cortex and the hippocampus, particularly going bad. And in Parkinson's, you have the substantia nigra and deep parts of the brain going bad. And in Lewy body, you get both of those going bad. So it's this diffuse destruction that's going on in the central nervous system. Now, why would that cause a person to want to commit suicide? It has more to speak to the struggles they deal with, because Lewy body dementia people have horrible hallucinations and misperceptions of the world around them. You know, they're calling the fire department all the time because there's a fire in their house or something like that. And that gets a little old. And part of it is your affect and mood is controlled and destroyed as well. Right. So it's hard to keep a positive attitude in that certain. On that happy note, no, I mean, listen, I really appreciate the opportunity. Is it okay? Or I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. SWAMs. Just go home. All of you have the ability to protect your brain and slow the process of aging. And if it's add some water to it, we can make another W in there somehow or another. But sleep, Mediterranean diet to the extent that you can, aerobic activity, weights, and Rotary Club meetings, right?
An applause, right?
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. I think we also had some requests for the slides. So we do post these on our YouTube channel. So those of you that were requesting the slides, don't forget that we do post them on our YouTube channel. So they'll be very easy to refer back to. And if you wouldn't mind signing this book, we actually are the lead sponsor for Raising Readers, and we will be giving this to a 2-year-old at their well check. So thank you so much again. Now, get up here. Please stand for the 4-way test. Of the things we do and say, is it the truth? Is it fair? Is it concern? Will we be all concerned?